Hello, and welcome to a very special bonus episode of Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. We decided to record this episode because a lot of people, I think, are expected to go to what could quite possibly be the largest single protest event in American history. And that makes sense because there is growing concern about what we are seeing in the streets every day in America, whether that is masked men and women stealing people from their families or growing grift and corruption, the size and scale of which we simply have never seen in this country before. Or perhaps it is because of the growing affordability gap, people not able to find jobs, let alone pay their ever increasing bills. Or perhaps it is the very real fear of losing healthcare and losing loved ones because of that. Because of all of these things, and perhaps many, many more, Americans will be taking to the streets on Saturday for a No Kings event. And I would first start out by saying one thing, which is protest is your God given right as an American, and you should feel comfortable, confident, and proud to address and redress concerns about your government to your government. There is nothing wrong, indeed, there is nothing more American than speaking up against your government, whether or not you believe with the position in power. One of the dangers of fascism, and we are in fact seeing this now here in America, is the fact that patriotism or being an American is now being conditioned to mean only I completely support the words and messages of the current administration. And what that also, by definition, means is if you say, I don't agree with this president, or I don't agree with this policy, or I don't agree with this big, terrible bill, then you are not American. And if no one else is telling you this, let me be the first to just tell you there is no more fundamental right than sticking up and protesting against your government. This government itself, this country itself, was founded on the principle of representation. Of course, the Boston Tea Party. You all heard about this in school, obviously, but protest is an essential backbone of America. And I fully recognize that we haven't always gotten it right, and that many people have spent decades and centuries protesting in this country just to get a basic seat at the table. A basic seat at the table. A table that they well deserve. And so, let us take to the streets and let us learn the lessons of the past so that we can have an effective event. I keep saying before I begin, but let me also address a couple of things that are core to what I believe about protest. Number one, I fundamentally believe that the idea that you have to have a permit or an advanced notice, or you have to go there and do whatever they say you want to do, in other words, protest on this street where the police say it's okay, I fundamentally disagree with that principle. I don't think that is in any way what the founders decided was important when they crafted the First Amendment. I think they quite clearly understood that it was important for you not to be afraid of a tyrannical fascist. And so, quite correctly, they decided to instill as not just an amendment, but the First Amendment being your right to address your government. And I think it perhaps might have been a while since someone has reviewed the full text of that First Amendment with you. So for today, let us go ahead and review the text of the First Amendment so that you know the power that you are granted by the founders of this country. The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. One more time for the folks in back. The First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. You will note that the First Amendment does not say, by the way, make sure you get a permit. Side note, a little bit of a side note. But yeah, now you understand the text and the meaning of the text and the importance of the text, and now you are equipped to understand how to use it. Your First Amendment is a God-given right to you that you have to stand up and speak up against your government. Do not let them try to take it away from you. And worse, Do not let them try to scare it away from you. That is clearly what is happening. So we are actually recording this episode live. So in the chat, by the way, if you want to ask questions or share your feelings about the No Kings event and you want to talk through it, and you want to maybe ask a question or tell how you're feeling, that can go right into the podcast for the show. So some of the things that people are kind of saying about No Kings that I want to address and the protests and protests in general. I think a lot of people with the rising tension in America, what happened with, obviously Charlie Kirk, people are rightfully concerned about protest safety. They're concerned about a rise in things like gun violence. They're concerned about the tension and the tenor. And I want to just like really point out that in a normal time in America, if a historically large protest were about to happen, a good president, would get up and would say, "Hey, everyone, I know that you may or may not agree with me. I know that our policies are not popular with every American. Nonetheless, I am the president of every American, and I am the president, and my job is to uphold and maintain the Constitution, to support your rights, whether you agree with me or not. And so, by the way, I hope you have a safe and fun event. Thank you for being great Americans. Perhaps we could find a seat at the table to find things that we agree with." That is what a good, normal president would do at this time. That is what a good, normal president would do. But obviously, it's much different now. Much different. So let us talk about how we work in that environment. As we are recording the show today, a lot of people are openly voicing their concerns about safety. And that is obviously because there's rising tension in the country. And a sense, in spite of what I just said, that we are growing farther and farther apart from each other. The first thing I would tell you is the fact that we are perhaps leagues apart in how we view the world and how we view the country does not diminish or take away your right to protest. The fact that the government does not agree with you and may or may not have a certain number of supporters does not mean that you are not correct and you do not have the right to speak up against your government. One other thing that I would note, just so that you're aware, don't take your temperature check of resistance in America by the internet. Indeed, we now know that the internet is growing and increasing in bot traffic, with fully half of all internet traffic being bots, and a significant portion of those bots being malicious bots with bad intentions. And as billionaires control tech platforms, they can deploy or work with others to deploy these systems in order to control and manipulate conversation. So if you're concerned about things like safety, or whether you're on the right side of history, or whether people agree with you candidly, don't take your temperature check from the internet. This is why it is actually quite important that you have the ability to go to a thing like an in person protest to meet and connect and network with other people, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. So, one of the things I forget is that a lot of people have never been to a protest before, and they're just now starting to realize that they have to show up on the streets and resist, and they have to show up and meet community and connect with other people and find those other people and show that they are not okay with what's happening in this country. And many people have gone to their first protest this year, and many people, such as myself, have been to hundreds of them. And there's a big difference in between. But one of the reasons that we're recording this bonus episode today is that if you have never been to a protest and you are aware of the current political environment, you're probably having a little bit of concern about your own safety. So let's talk about it. And I want to give you some tips and some tricks. If you've never been to a protest before, and this is your first one, and this is the first event that you're going to, I want to just recognize that you are a great American patriot. And I want to really celebrate and thank you for that. I think it's really important that you exercise that right. So the first thing is a recognition. Recognize that you took a bold step in protecting and preserving your freedoms. Like, really just soak that in for a minute and understand that you did something that honestly a lot of people never do. A lot of people are born, they go through their entire life, and they never go to a protest or go to a city council meeting or write a letter or do anything to actually be a responsible citizen. So in spite of what the angry, hateful people who control the government say, if you actually get involved with your country in whatever way that is for you, that is being a true American. So, by taking that first step out onto the streets on Saturday, you're doing that. So let me just cover a quick toolkit for protest and protest safety, something that we've developed and modified. Obviously, before I point that out, my lawyer would probably want me to let you know that this is not legal advice, that I am not a lawyer, and that you should always filter your own safety as your most important priority. So let's get into key protest safety before we begin. Number one, before the protest, preparation and planning. The first step in responsible protest and being a responsible citizen and participating is being a responsible and knowledgeable citizen of your local area. So, as we discussed, the First Amendment gives you the right to address concerns about your government. Having said that, there are crazy laws that exist that may require you to have a permit in order to protest. Well, if you're listening to this on Friday, it might be a little bit too late for you to be the permit police. But if you're going to one of the major events called No Kings this weekend, it's likely they have a permit for the event. So the first thing is reviewing your local laws. In most cities, they have already put out guidance or guidelines. Most police departments or city councils have put out that kind of information. I would say my general experience with protesting in America is if you're not sure about that, if you show up and you're peaceful and you're respectful and you're a good, decent person, the worst thing that can happen is someone can politely ask you to leave. If you don't leave, you can get trespassed and you might get a ticket for trespassing. Okay? That's probably the worst thing that's going to happen to you. I fundamentally disagree with this principle, but it is the reality of most local participations. Group sizes, each city is going to have a different one. There are regulations that control gatherings of group sizes. They use these for other things like concerts or, events, that kind of thing. And so they make those laws to pretend that there is a purpose to do that, but the reality is stifling your speech. So, just keep that in mind. Check with that if you can. If you're registered for an event, it's likely they've already done that. The next one is knowing your purpose. Know the reason and purpose of why you're going. Have you actually thought about what it is that you want to go to this event or any protest for? Have you set out your mission and goals? Just showing up is great, but if you go with a purpose, that is much more effective because it allows you to connect with individuals who may share your same purpose. They may share your same message. So, what is the specific thing and the reason that you're going to show up for? Knowing that is going to allow you to connect with other people in your community. Next, when it comes to planning and preparation, how well do you understand the area that you're in and the place that you're going to be protesting? Are you familiar with the area? If you're not going on Saturday and you're going to a future event and you know that an event's going to be held at like in front of the library, for example, one of the best things you can do is go and look at the space and understand where you're going to be protesting. If you are going to the No Kings event on Saturday and you have time today after listening to this, go see the area and understand. If you can't do that, do something like go on Google Maps and look at the area from street view to understand and be familiar with your surroundings. Know the major streets and exits always have not just a primary exit, but 2 or 3 backup exit plans that you can have to quickly and safely exit in case you need to. So, looking at the area and understanding it is going to be one of the ways that you can protect yourself. It's also how you can understand where you're looking, where the event is, all that sort of thing. Things people don't think about this, but things like traffic can cause these kind of problems. Another thing is if you're not familiar with the area and you get there on Saturday and wow, you have to park a mile away because you weren't aware that there wouldn't be parking, then you know you're going to have a tough, it might take you 25 minutes just to get there and 25 minutes to get back, obviously. So, and then the next part of of knowing your plan and having the plan is sharing that plan. So there are people who may or may not be going to the event with you. If they're not going to the event with you, go ahead and just share your plans. Let them know what you're going to do, where you're going to be. Say, hey, if you don't hear from me by 3 o'clock, like that's probably a good indication that, something's going on. And I think that will help. So yeah, one of the reasons that doing those steps is important is it demonstrates your commitment to safe and effective protest because you've put the work in to doing that. I always like to point this out, but I think one of the things that is happening in the current state of our country right now is people have to over index on the idea of safe protest It should just be given that exercising your First Amendment right is a safe act. Like, you shouldn't have to say, "Oh, I'm going to protest and I'm going to be nonviolent." That should just be an expectation. And I think it's a bit silly that we have kind of put ourselves in the corner of always constantly having to over-index and say, "Oh, it's a nonviolent protest. It's a nonviolent protest. It's a nonviolent protest." Yes, we get it. We understand. We know that. I think it's unnecessary to constantly over-index on that. The expectation should be that if you're gonna protest, it's in the First Amendment, right? We covered that. To peacefully assemble. Your right is to peacefully assemble. So you shouldn't have to bargain and negotiate with the police about that because you're just simply exercising your First Amendment right. You're choosing to cash the check of your First Amendment. You should not have to constantly write more checks explaining yourself. That's all I'll say about that. Having said that, it is important to commit to that in advance. Commit to being peaceful in your protest. Commit to that in advance. If you're going with people you know, commit to that in advance. If you're going with people you don't know, that's actually where it's more important to commit to that in advance. To say like, hey, if you're going to be joining this group, like this is a peaceful assembly, right? Next, what to bring. Some essentials to bring to a protest. And I would say again, I'm not a lawyer. You need to be checking on this on your local area. Check with your local organizers. Essentials to bring are things like water, snacks, a safe to carry identification, and I recommend bringing cash and not necessarily credit cards. The other things I'd recommend bringing are just like basic protection, like checking out how many layers are appropriate for the day. If it's going to be very hot and you bring lots of layers, that you could get sick from heat stroke, for example. Bring things like hand sanitizer and, of course, as I said, weather appropriate clothing. But if you're concerned about other things like I mean, I have glasses, so I have, like, natural eye protection, but there's nothing wrong with bringing something like goggles. If you're going in a group, have a safety first aid kit. If there's, like, 10 of you, could one of you commit to having a first aid kit available that has tools available for basic first aid if necessary? Not everyone needs to bring one, but if you're going with a group and one person can, that would be great. The other thing, I wanna talk about phones. I want to talk about phones. I've seen a lot of conversation about phones at protests. A lot of people say, I'm not bringing my phone, that sort of thing. Here's what I would tell you. Everyone makes their own decision on this area. What I would tell you about phones at a protest is as follows. The tools of government surveillance are so significantly advanced since, for example, Barack Obama's era. Um, Whether or not you bring your phone to the protest, the government has more than enough technology to identify you. And it goes back to the first principle. If you're going to protest at a protest and you're doing nothing wrong, I don't see the reason to be so concerned that you won't bring a phone. Having said that, there are things that you can do to protect your phone, such as turning off Face ID or turning off biometric unlocking of your phone, because the police can force you to use Face ID or your fingerprint as an example. But if you turn those features off, or some phones allow you to disable them, that allows you to prevent the police from having access to your phone. You can also do things like disabling tracking. So you can disable location services. And of course, you can write down important numbers in case your phone is lost or confiscated. Something else to consider that I would recommend is if your phone operates with a SIM card, you can get a very cheap and basic, affordable, for example, basic, what you would call a dumb phone, like a non smartphone, where it's a flip phone or just an old like Motorola phone. You can often get those for like $20, $40 at something like a Best Buy. And then you can just take your SIM card out, pop it in the dumb phone. You have a phone that works, that's not recording every single thing about your life. And that's a great example of a tool that you can use when you go to a protest. Get a dumb phone, pop the SIM card in, you're good to go. Just a little bit of a tip for you there. I understand why people have made the decision to say or to encourage people not to bring their cell phones to the protest. What I would say is, like, if that is the country that we already live in, then they are tracking you on your phone no matter what you're doing. Are they not? They're following you no matter what you're doing. Are they not? So, again, everyone has their own individual confidence level there. I would challenge you that it is not necessary to leave your phone at home. That's my personal recommendation. One of the reasons I say that we'll talk about in a second as well. The next one that I would say, just in terms of clothing, a lot of conversation about clothing right now. I'm not going to be the protest clothing police right now. But a couple things that I would say that you should be aware of from a clothing perspective. Um, Regardless of whether you dress in a certain color or that sort of thing, I think avoiding dramatically identifiable clothing, unless, for example, you choose to wear like a frog costume. But just the reason I say that is if someone decides that they want to focus on you and you're wearing a Where's Waldo kinda shirt, that makes it a little bit easier to focus on you. That's all I would say about that. One thing that I always recommend for people, if you have contacts, if you wear contact lenses, okay, if you wear contact lenses and tear gas is deployed, that is literally going to stick to your eyes. So I would not recommend, I'm sorry, I would not recommend wearing contact lenses. That would be my one recommendation in terms of clothing. The other thing obviously is, like, don't wear sandals. It sounds silly to say, but don't wear sandals. And in the conversation of masks, again, I'm not going to be the mask and masking police for protest. I understand both sides of the conversation. I've seen a lot of people saying, like, don't wear masks to protest. The one thing I would caveat that is there are people who legitimately are not able to go out in public spaces without a mask for their own health purposes. And I think that when we say something like no masks, what we're essentially saying is like you're not welcome at the protest. And I don't love that. I think that's not something that I would encourage. In the larger conversation of masks, I understand that the masks do a lot of things. They can, I'm just being honest with you, they can create unnecessary tension, they can create unnecessary fear, they can create unnecessary division, and it does make it a little bit more difficult to differentiate and delineate or even lose your friends and family in an event that something like that happens. The next part is during the protest. Okay. Number one, first of all, let's just take a little bit of a break out of this. Have fun at the protest. Like, I know it sounds scary. We're talking about a lot of like, intense stuff right now. It's very unlikely that that's going to happen. And so, in terms of safety, what I want to just take a pause to say is like, don't forget that you're there to have fun, to connect with other people, and to be a good fucking American. Okay. So, just a little bit of a break before we go into the more heavy stuff here. But from a safety perspective, there's a saying, and it's about being aware. And so, what I would say is there's an old saying called "keep your head on a swivel." And keep your head on a swivel just means be scanning the environment. Be aware of those exits we talked about. Be aware of crowds and law enforcement. Keep your eyes focused and attentive. Look for things that don't belong. Be aware. That doesn't mean being paranoid. It just means being more aware than normal. One of the things that I always happens, by the way, it always happens, is when something happens, like when a tragedy happens, you always hear people say, like, I saw something, I didn't say something, it didn't I thought someone else was gonna say something, that kind of thing, right? So, that is why it's also helpful, by the way, to move with protected groups. So if you're going with 5 people or you meet 5 people and you're there, like, find those groups of people, right? That's what I'd recommend. I do have to say, as much as I'm not a huge fan of interpersonal relationships, I don't recommend protesting alone. And what that can mean for you is like, you get a feel of someone, you feel like you trust them, like, not protesting alone is certainly safer than protesting alone. I'm just calling that out. And then the last thing is we talked about this in the preparation phase, but observe the environment, observe the layout, observe potential hazards. That's even like trip hazards, by the way. The next part is communication. One thing I would say, we've already talked about phones, cell phones, all those things. Some people are talking about walkie talkies. Those are all great ideas. Um, in terms of communication, what I would suggest and what I would recommend to you is that you have a dedicated rendezvous point. So you say, for example, hey, regardless of what happens, we're going to meet here at 3 p.m. We're going to meet at the 7-Eleven, the front doors of the 7-Eleven at 3 p.m. And if something does happen, follow through on your plan. Follow through on your plan. And then, the next part I want to talk about is interactions with police. It's an important part of protest safety. Okay. The reality is that police violence is increasing in America, and we are not seeing the same kind of community response from our police that we should expect. And you would expect that police who swear an oath to the Constitution would be respectful of our right to protest. However, that's simply not what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a dramatic increase in police violence. In Las Vegas, during one of the last No Kings events during the summer, over 100 protesters were violently arrested. They were hit with pepper balls. They were put in inhumane conditions. They were forced to have people read prayers to them in jail. And most of those charges, incidentally, were dismissed. Most of those charges were dismissed. But it's an example of, and many of you have seen, of course, there's countless examples of that happening where it's just like they get escalated. Okay. So a couple tips that I would provide to you about police interactions. Number one, don't take the bait. Don't take the bait. Something we talk about often on Rebel Radio is a police concept called kettling. Kettling is a concept where police form a line and they advance on a group of protesters. And essentially, kettling is to push people into a spot for which they cannot escape. That's often a corner or a fence or something like that. And so, in terms of awareness, if you see police lining up and preparing to move and advance forward, one of the reasons they do that is as they advance on you, you, of course, are not able to touch them. You cannot and you should not touch them. But if you do, you can be charged with a crime. And so they will move forward against you, against your will, in what's called a kettle. And the kettle is one of the most dangerous parts of any protest. It is. It's one of the most dangerous parts of any protest because what it does is they advance towards you with the expectation that you will touch them or interact with them or that you will get upset or you'll get scared. If you see that happening, get out. Nothing good happens after a kettle, is what I would tell you. In my 20 plus years of being in protest, nothing good happens after a kettle. Okay? And if this is your first time learning about kettles, congratulations. Like, now you know. Now you're not going to fall for the trick, right? And by the way, this is just a side note. By the way, the fact that you get kettled by the police does not mean that you did anything wrong. I really want to point that out. The fact that you get kettled does not mean that you did anything wrong. Someone on the live chat, by the way, they had no idea about kettling. So now I'm glad you learned. Yeah, trust me. Yeah, you may not have known about it, but you've probably seen it, is what I would say. All right. So some other tips around interacting with law enforcement that I would give you. Okay. If for some reason you encounter law enforcement and they attempt to detain you or they attempt to question you, the first thing, never talk to the fucking cops. Ever. Never, ever talk to the police. Ever. Nothing you say to the police will be used for your advantage. So, what I would encourage you to learn to say and to practice is, am I free to go? Am I being detained? Am I free to go? Am I being detained? Am I free to go? Am I being detained? Am I being detained? Am I being detained? Practice that in your head because when you're intense and you just got kettled and the tensions are high and you're sweating and you got tear gas on you, you're going to forget that question because you're going to be like, I'm so upset right now. And you should be because it's stupid. But you're going to forget that. You're going to forget that. So just, am I free to go? Am I free to go? Force the police to assert that you are being detained. Am I being detained? Yes, you're being detained. Under what purpose, under what law, under what regulation am I being detained? Make them say it out loud. The reason I say this, friends, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but if you are illegally detained by the police and they attempt to investigate you and they detain you against your will and they cannot cite the reason for their detention, for detaining you, and you get arrested anyway, which I want to let you know is a very likely outcome. If you do all of those things, number one, you'll probably get your case thrown out. Again, not a lawyer. Number two, anything they obtain against you, evidence they obtain against you in an illegal detention or illegal search could potentially be thrown out. And number three, if they illegally arrest you and illegally detain you, you should sue them. You should sue them. You should sue them and go on a cruise. For me. Do it for me. Obviously, it goes without saying, don't do things that get you in front of the police. Don't be violent. Don't throw things. Don't be aggressive. But even if you do everything right, know your rights as a protester? Am I being detained? Am I free to go? I'm only going to speak to my lawyer. I'm exercising my right to remain silent. I'm only going to be speaking to my lawyer. What is the reason that I'm being detained? What is the reasonable, articulate purpose of my detention? Standing on a street is not a reasonable reason to detain me. Okay? So, and the last part is do not consent to any kind of search. Period. Full stop. Do not consent to any kind of search. Say openly, I do not consent to you searching my property. They're going to probably do it anyway. Okay? But I do not consent. I do not consent. Now, I'm going to close this out with one thing. Okay? After everything I just said, do not take that advice to mean that whatever you can do, if you interact with law enforcement, you're going to be fine. One of your primary goals should be not to interact with law enforcement. You're choosing to exercise the First Amendment right to peacefully assemble. You should avoid interacting with law enforcement. It's not going to end well, okay? A lot of people have done everything right going to a protest and they end up in jail. And maybe those charges get dismissed. Maybe they sue the police, okay? But going to jail for the most common thing people get arrested at a protest, by the way, is failure to disperse. So police will say, oh, this is an unlawful assembly. You have to disperse. So disperse. And people don't leave, or they don't leave the right way, or they don't hear them. That's actually the most common thing. They don't hear them. And so they just start arresting people, okay? And, you might say to yourself, well, that's not fair. Yeah, it's not fair, of course. But even if you beat, there's an old saying in the law and in protest. You can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. Does anyone know what that means? The saying is you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. Well, what that means is you might eventually get those charges dismissed. You might eventually get those charges dropped. You might eventually, if they take you to a trial, you might eventually get that trial. You might get acquitted in a trial. But you're not going to beat the trip to jail, the trip in the back of the police car. You're not going to, like I've known people that had their property taken from them. They've had their glasses broken. They've been physically assaulted. They've been hurt deeply, like permanently. You're not going to beat the rap. So that's all I have to say about that. Okay, so that's a lot of conversation about interacting with the police, but it is ultimately one of the most significant things that could happen to you at a protest, aside from outside agitators, as an example. I will now say that it is very unlikely that that's going to happen to you. The vast majority of protests in America in the No Kings era, in the anti-fascist era of our country, have been extremely peaceful and have had minimal police involvement. Obviously, every day when you turn on the news and you see the violence being committed against American citizens or undocumented immigrants by immigration's customs and enforcement, it's easy to conflate the two. So let's get into some other key areas of safety that I want to talk about, which is de-escalation. Okay. De-escalation, there's a lot of great content. We could probably cover that in an entire section on a future episode of the podcast. But the main principle when you think about de-escalation is just like prepare yourself to de-escalate. And you've de-escalated people in the past, whether you know that or not. If you've ever had any job in customer service, you know how to do conflict de-escalation. So don't engage with provocateurs, point them out, identify them. That would be one instance where you could interact with law enforcement, I would imagine. If you see someone who looks like they're actively dangerous, number one, get away from them. Number two, don't instigate or don't feed the trolls, and do things like using nonviolent open posture, using a calm tone of voice, steady breathing. Okay. If something does happen, if something, violent does happen, think to yourself, I'm going to calmly exit the situation. And then, of course, if you do have to leave, or if it does become a situation that's unsafe, keeping an eye out for people who are distressed or people who may have had a medical incident is important. If it does get to a place where it's important to leave or it's not safe, don't forget the other people there with you. Don't forget your other comrades. If someone trips and is injured and you're able to assist them, assist them. All right. One other thing I want to talk about, which is tear gas. Couple things about tear gas. Tear gas is a real bummer. If tear gas does get deployed at a protest, a couple things. Number one, do not rub your eyes. Try to flush it with clean water if you can. Try to get uphill and upwind of it if you can. Um, and with tear gas and or pepper spray, do not use like an oil or a cream that can actually make it much worse. You may need to consider seeking medical help, incidentally. If you are injured, make sure that you document those injuries and take notes of when and how you were injured. So if you got injured, say like at approximately 2:20 p.m., um, I was hit in the left lower leg with a pepper ball. I was not doing anything wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's what I would say about that. The next section that I would say in terms of why I actually recommend bringing, a phone, for example, is, documentation. It's very important to document. Somebody in the chat talked about legal observers. Somebody talked about being or having legal observers. You are your own best legal observer. So if you have your phone and you can live stream, as an example, live streaming is a great way to secure yourself because most of the time live streaming actually uploads that information to the cloud instantly. So, for example, if your phone is stolen or damaged or broken, there's a backup in the cloud. The next one is, something I do. I don't have the full setup with me because I'm getting ready for it, but I have a GoPro that I just have on a mount right here. One tap to record. If something starts happening, I click the one tap. It's good to go. Um, that's what I do. It doesn't record the entirety of the events. It's just available on a one-tap quick record. So I have that in case I need to document something. I will say the vulnerability of that strategy is a lot of things happen before you click record sometimes. But I do have a GoPro that's a dedicated device that I can use to do that. So that's one of the things that I do. And also I have that a lot of areas of my life, like when I'm working, for example, I've got the chest mount GoPro. It's pretty helpful to have that. And then, of course, I'm going to pause again to say one of the things that I would just zoom out to talk about is we're talking about the worst of it. It's much more likely that you're going to have a really fun time, that you're going to connect with people, and you're going to have really an important Saturday. So I do want to point that out one more time. Okay. A couple of things I want to talk about as we talk about before we get to the end of the protest. When you go to any event like No Kings, if you go, you're going to find all of those people who think the same way that you do. You're going to find all the sort of the rebels. You're going to find the resistance. You're going to find people who want good things for this country. Okay? So, this is hard for some of us, but I'm just going to directly challenge you. If it's hard, connect with those people. Make friends, get phone numbers, like find those people in your community. Go grab coffee afterwards. Go to the library afterwards. Identify the mutual areas that are most passionate for you. Connect with those essential members of the resistance and found and form those groups. Make a Signal group, make a Discord group, all those kinds of things. You're never going to have a bigger group of people that think the same way as you. And if you go to the protest and you hold up your sign and you walk away and you do nothing else, that's great. But if you go to the protest and you meet 20 people and each of those people meets 20 people, now you've built a network of thousands of people who are doing the same good work that you're doing. Okay? So that would be one thing. I know we're talking a lot about safety. We're talking a lot about those types of things. Your primary purpose should be to peacefully assemble, right? We know that. Your primary purpose should be to peacefully assemble, to not be afraid to assemble. But your secondary purpose should be to build an effective network of resistance by connecting with people who feel the same way. Connect with those people. We're actually going to talk about that in the future. But yeah. So like, okay, I'm just gonna call this out. It is okay, even though you're an adult, it's okay to ask someone to be your friend. Like, I maybe this is just because of how I handle interpersonal relationships, right? Um, it's okay. Like, I will often literally say to someone, this is like getting a little bit personal here, but I will say something like, "Hey, you know, I am autistic. I'm not good with this kind of in-person stuff, but I do want to connect with you, and it's okay to follow up with me, and it's okay if I don't respond to you to like really bug me to get back to me. I would like us to link up so that we can have like more mutual aid and more mutual safety. Like I will just say that. And for me, I actually just had to train myself to say that. It's sort of me. It's like reading a script, by the way. But it works. I mean, I've got like, if you actually look at my signal, you'll see like me say a version of that like hundreds of times. I'll be like, "Hey person, it's me. I just want to let you know that I probably not the best in person, but I really want to stay connected." And every single time they're like, "Oh, totally. No, you're great. We love you. Yeah, no, you're fine." So just a little tip. Most people are make better. Most people are better at that than me, but I recognize that. So, after you've connected with everyone, after you've had an effective and successful protest, the first thing I would tell you is now you're good at this and you should do it all of the time. You should do it all of the time. But as you're leaving, I want to talk about a few things. Okay. Um, this is why we talked about the importance of documentation. Sometimes with your group, it's important to potentially share that documentation, make sure you all have a repository of that information. And then a couple other things about, exiting safely. We've talked a lot about knowing when to leave, that sort of thing. If everything goes as planned and everyone, the protest event ends successfully, couple things. You don't have to end it there. As I said earlier, you can say, hey, let's go grab coffee, or hey, let's go maybe set up a book reading group, or hey, let's go figure out how we can mutually go to a city council meeting, make those friends and connections, right? When we talk about the subject of exiting, if you think there's like 1,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 people in one space, my primary, I guess, thing I would mention in terms of successful exit of protest is be respectful. And remember that everyone came there for a good purpose. Don't go have a high energy, great protest and then be screaming fuck you on the way out because someone cut you off in traffic. Like that's that's not an effective thing to do. And then use and create all of those things that you did. So when you've made those connections, when you've found those groups of people, like actually lean into them and use them. Post about it. Post the funny pictures. Post the funny protest signs. Your social proof of posting that is going to be the kind of thing that maybe somebody didn't go to the protest. They're going to see you having fun, dressed like a frog, standing next to someone with a hilarious sign. That's going to make it more likely for them to go to their next protest, if that makes sense. Okay. Whew. Okay, everybody. This was supposed to be a 10-minute special edition of Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. It turned into a 40-minute episode, but I think it was largely helpful. So thank you for joining us for this special episode. We'll be back with our regular episodes on Monday, which I'm excited about. The final point I would say is this. I know a lot of people feel a certain way about these protests. I know people feel a lot of tension. The last thing I would say is I understand that America is at a perilous moment at this time. I can honestly tell you, it does not have to be like this. It does not have to be so bad. We do not have to be afraid of our neighbors or afraid of our police, but it requires constant work, constant resistance, and it requires us to show up in the places that they expect us not to show up. If we want to change this government, we're going to have to rattle some cages. We're going to have to show up at city council meetings and talk to our city commissioners. We're going to have to be a little bit loud. We're going to have to be a little bit annoying. And there's a difference between being annoying and being violent. Don't forget that. Don't allow your participation in peaceful protest to be branded as violence or as Antifa or as anything like that. You are doing this for a good and noble purpose. You are going to have fun. If it's your first protest, congratulations. I promise it will not be your last. If you like this episode, I hope you consider following the show and following the podcast, or leaving us a helpful comment and rating it on your favorite platform. There's a lot to talk about. It was a great episode. I hope you find it valuable, and we'll see you out on the streets.